It is time to talk about Final Fantasy XVI. The game has been out for a few days. Both me and Matt have played a fair bit of it, and it has been a more interesting launch than I think many people had expected.
That's putting it lightly. I thought generally Final Fantasy launches have been quite clear. Square Enix jump out the gate and go, this has sold 80 bajillion copies and everyone's very happy and everyone rates it highly, and then some people say, well, Japanese games are bad, whatever. But this one's certainly been like, on sales, on opinion, on reviews, it's definitely been a more interesting time than I think ever before.
Yeah, this is a game that is profoundly good at doing what it's interested in doing, and it is, I think, bad at doing what it is not interested in doing. The problem is that for a lot of people like you or me, we're perfectly fine to enjoy what this game is interested in doing, but for a lot of other people, they are wanting a more broad experience from a Final Fantasy title, and I think it's less that this game isn't doing that. It's more that this game is fundamentally not interested in doing that because it's more interested in doing what it's doing. I think that is why we have to say this has been an interesting launch, even though if I quickly skite down here and show you its critical stuff, you do have 95% of critics recommending and a 90 top critic average. So much like, funny enough, Final Fantasy XV, big picture, very well regarded at launch. But of course, if you go beyond just the headline, average review scores and stats for Final Fantasy XV, you do find there's actually a lot more to talk about with that game and how it's been remembered by its community and its launch state versus the state that it's in now if you buy it with all its DLC.
Yeah, there's certainly, Final Fantasy has been a very interesting and troubled franchise since, it happened to all of Japanese games, the transition to the PS3. And that era completely tanked most of Japanese development, almost threatened the entire industry there. And between 13's launch and its fragmentation into 3 games, 15's launch and all of the hey, sorry, we've cancelled all the DLC and the director's gone because of production issues. And funny enough that we'll talk about this in depth in a little bit, but 16 is very much a product of how do we not do what Final Fantasy does wrong, has resulted in kind of sometimes maybe a production-focused development, which you can very clearly see and feel. And I think it might actually speak to, and this is maybe a little bit broad, but it might speak to, there's a problem brewing with AAA, production, and this is an example of why it's really getting bad. In a kind of roundabout way of, they tried to solve those problems, and they suffered losses for it.
Yes, there are things that they paid lip service to that they maybe would have been better just not doing. And it is an interesting thing because we're looking at Final Fantasy, but combat by Ryota Suzuki, who is, say, Devil May Cry. This is, in fact, big for you too. This is the game that will actually have me buying and playing Devil May Cry 5. That's definitely true. So that is not something that screams Final Fantasy to the traditional Final Fantasy fan, just as God of War and Game of Thrones are not things that immediately call out to the traditional Final Fantasy fan. And as much as a Final Fantasy twist, the spoiler is you kill God at the end. I'm not actually anywhere near the end of this game. I have no idea. All I know is a lot of people saying it certainly goes in a direction, and some people have not ended up being particularly there for that change in direction.
And as I'm about 80% of the way through the game, I can completely see where they're coming from, and I disagree that they don't like it. Okay, well, I obviously they can not like it if they want,
yes,
but it's more the case of I can see why people might have issues, but it works really well for me, and it works really well for a recurring fan of that, so I feel like I'm catered to. So I could see there might be a little bit of this game starts and people think it's one thing, and then maybe it's kind of not the whole way through, which is fascinating.
Yeah, it's why I particularly enjoyed the skill up review of that game, because I agree with every single criticism that he's made. I'm still having a lot of fun with the game, but I do agree with every single criticism he's made, which kind of means it's less about what are you critical of in a game or not critical of. There's something beyond that that is your how you weight different parts of an experience. Clearly for me, I don't care about quite a few of the things that he's critical of, even though I completely agree with him that the game does them badly. I think most notably of all being that a lot of games weave their narrative through gameplay, and as much as this game will say cinematic clash, and to do that, and there are bits where key story moments obviously play out through combat, in terms of the narrative design of this game, it is very plain and very traditional and very old. It is, you are fighting now, you are doing plot now, outside of those really bigger than big moments where the two converge.
Yeah, and that's a thing that's basically staple of a lot of that genre is like, hey, we don't try to do anything super interesting or unique. With everything, it's literally, hey, we have this, and this is where we get into it being like production friendly, where you go, everything was clearly designed in a way that it goes, how much of this can we do? As much as we want, can we slot it in? What happens if we have to cut something? And the answer is, doesn't matter, because we've designed it to be almost like a rocket, where it's like the point is, oh, that can come off. That
Yes.
as part of the design is, oh yeah.
It feels like Final Fantasy is the booster stage of the thing that they're interested in doing, which may or may not appeal to Final Fantasy fans.
Well, yeah, well, that's where I will say the thing that they want to do is Final Fantasy.
Yes.
And we'll have to talk about the staff involved here and why it may not feel like Final Fantasy to people despite literally being Final Fantasy and some of its deepest roots.
Very quick thing in sales, we do not have official numbers. What we can do is look at UK physical sales, because that's particularly well tracked. Sometimes this actually does end up being a good indicator when you can be sort of like for like. What we can say is that Final Fantasy XVI is the number one in the UK. But as far as this is per Chris Dring, as far as box launches go, it's not a particularly strong one. Physical sales are 74% lower than the launch week of Final Fantasy XV in 2016. However, obviously, digital is so much bigger nowadays than it was back then, so it's kind of hard to tell. But I think one interesting thing that Alex Donaldson was pointing out is what we'll probably have to do is compare this to 7 Remake, maybe 7 Remake Intergrade, because I want to sell that again. But also, there's no Xbox. Xbox was a little under 25%, I believe, for 15 in the UK at least. So
That's honestly more than I would have guessed.
yeah, they're going to lose something to the Xbox thing. But then also collector's edition stock. Collector's edition stock was out of stock like 2 months before the game came out. And actually it was 2 to 3 times the price on secondary market in and around launch. Collector's edition stuff for FF16 is still in stock.
Yeah, and there's could be any number of reasons for that, including like Square Enix being like overly bullish and going, okay, well, we'll just have loads of collector's edition because people love Final Fantasy, or it could be...
And as we know, it's Square Enix. They are prone to adding another 5 million to their expectation and then disappointing themselves.
They're very good at that, and you could see how they would do that with 16, especially 16 after 14's recent resurgence. They may be going, well, we can see this in the Final Fantasy and the MMO market. What if we translate those percentages over to the broader gaming market? And that's a surefire way to completely disappoint yourself. But again, you might just go, well, that's cope. This game didn't sell, and like that's a complete possibility. It's just we won't know until we see some numbers. It is, I was going to say concerning, because I'm pretty invested in Final Fantasy series, so I will, like, that's the term I would use personally. But that Square Enix didn't immediately come out and go, hello, we've sold more than anything ever in history, is a little bit like, oh, that tells a story, because generally when something goes well, they will kick down the door to get to talk about it.
Yes. So. I think the big context is that this probably never had a chance of selling more than FF15. Yeah, FF15 at the time it was coming out was so unbelievably hyped. You know, people had this humongous hunger to have Final Fantasy back after, you know, FF13, which is a bit more controversial, FF13-2, which was a better game.
People tapped out after 13. I think that's
the thing.
Yeah.
And a lot of people will say that Lightning Returns had actually many merits in terms of its gameplay.
Sure did.
But people didn't come back. So Final Fantasy really had this long hiatus. People were so unbelievably excited for 15 that perhaps there were parts of 15 that they were okay, looking over at launch. Because 15 is not as well remembered as its reviews or initial sales would indicate it would be.
I remember liking it quite a bit, and then I look at it again and I go, what was I smoking? Good Lord, heaven above. But I guess another part of the difference in sales is obviously it's on the PS5 versus the PS4.
Yeah.
PS4, that was, I believe, was that 2016 or 2017? I think it was 2016, maybe 2015. Anyway, it was mid PS4 cycle, and the PS4 definitely sold quite a bit. Obviously, you know, there's however 100 million of them now, so the install base is pretty big, and the PS5 install base hasn't gotten to that point, but it is still like there is a bigger cost associated and a little bit less of that in terms of everyone's good PS5, like everyone did a PS4 at that point, which is I think interesting, but it does go to show that if you do protracted damage to your brand over a period of years, don't expect one victory to suddenly bring you back, and you might go, but FF14, that's still a pretty within the gaming market.
Yes.
within the MMO market, the niche market, the people who are likely, if you're watching this video, likely understand FF14 and go, oh yeah, I've heard that's back, that's good, FF's back. But that won't be the God of War audience. That won't be the Last of Us audience. That won't be the Game of Thrones watchers, which is clearly a lot of the intent for this market for this game to penetrate that market. They won't be going, Final Fantasy, that's a brand I know and love.
They'll definitely have a bit of a trouble where the people who sort of like the Game of Thrones seasons 1 through 4 thing, quite a lot of its tone does clash bizarrely with the Final Fantasy elements and where the game is more fantastical. And I do have to wonder if trying to hit that audience, as much as I do like that, edge of grit to things, to a lot of people who are not necessarily as bought in to the sort of Final Fantasy conceits, it might come across as being quite bizarre.
Yeah, the one thing I'll say on that is I think there's a lot of people who are looking at the Game of Thrones edition going, okay, well, this is clearly like a out of left field approach or like a weird design. And obviously like the mature elements of it definitely are a departure. But to me, I'm playing this, I'm just like, oh, this is what Final Fantasy 12 wanted to be. This is what Final Fantasy Tactics is. But they were on the PS1. So they couldn't really do that.
Yeah.
That's what all of like Matsuno's work and the works that are inspired by him actually ended up being. All of this kind of especially the progression from, hey, this is more political into this isn't keeping political, but it's pulling those themes forward into something that's a little bit more like abstract and conceptual. And that's always what Final Fantasy has done, but the heavy politicking, the heavy world building, that's all like the kingdoms fighting each other. That is like a Matsuno staple for Final Fantasy, and it's like maybe the tone's slightly new, but generally speaking, it's like this is... I have never played a game that is more Final Fantasy, but that's because I play FF14, and that game has kind of crystallized what FF is in a more recent form.
Yeah, this
which
fits
is
with
different.
that.
Yeah, which is very different to what people might think if they're going, oh yeah, well, the last FF, and this is the thing that they should be worried about, the last FF I've played or heard of was 7, 8, 9, or 10, but now you're going... hey, Final Fantasy is back, and it's a kind of Final Fantasy that none of you really played that much, by the way.
Yeah, because those games were a long time ago.
And 12 was, I think 12 did okay, but it was the odd one out of 10, 12, 13, 15.
Yeah. So with the actual game itself, the one thing that I think is universally disappointing is the out-of-combat performance. The frame rate dips do go beyond the variable refresh rate capabilities of the PS5, even on performance mode. It will dip below 48 frames per second, and it can have, I think, sometimes a visual, I don't want to say it's like a maximalism or something, but the game can be quite muddy and hard to read. I think it's because quite a lot of its level design is secondary. You know, it's like the actual layouts and stuff. It's very... it's not pushing anything forward, but like the actual fidelity that it's capable of, and if you put it onto its quality mode, it really does look fantastic.
Oh, it is.
But certainly outside of combat on performance mode, it is a more technically ropey experience, with the exception of save load times, which the PS5 absolutely continues to excel at. But yeah, you're not going to be getting fantastic performance in this. It is good that this is not coming out in PC day and date. That would probably have been an absolute disaster, and there is no way in hell that this probably could have fit onto a PS4 without the thing exploding.
Oh, yeah.
Once you get in combat, pretty much smooth, perfect.
It's the case of they've known what to target, and they've had to take losses. They've taken those losses pretty intently, which I think is interesting and something I'd like to talk about pretty much at length, but we're not going to be here for 2 hours because that would take me that, honestly, and would have to spoil half the game to do so. But I think the performance, it's not been as drastic as, say, me playing Jedi Survivor.
Yeah.
Jedi Survivor was a ropey experience, and you had the like render resolution drop like crazy, and that was noticeable. I've noticed frame drops playing this. I stick it in performance mode and keep it on that because I will not suffer anything less than that, which is weird because sometimes it's literally worse, but I just stick it on and forget, to be honest. And it's like, it's perfectly fine in combat. There's a couple times where you don't notice too much out in the world. Sometimes you go, well, that's a bit annoying, but generally it's not a massive deal. They was never going to ship on PC because they know that, so at least they didn't bother to ship a terrible product on PC. They went, we'll get that for you eventually, but it's literally going to take us like years of work, so we'll do that. We'll do that now. Cheers. But ultimately, it's like, outside of some cutscene frame dips, because they do such a lot of work in engine really nicely, it does ultimately end up that you get a couple of frame drops during heavy sections, which is frustrating.
It's funny with the cutscenes. I've been on the verge of being annoyed at how the game will just say, walk forward for 10 seconds, we're going to take the camera away from you. walk forward for another 5 seconds, we'll take the camera away again. It is certainly, and maybe this is the very production-led aspect of this, it is certainly not a game that really tries to innovate in any way on games as a medium. That thing where I think what the Final Fantasy franchise always internally the industry thought it represented, where, these would be the biggest games, the most HD games they would push everything for. And obviously that led to like 13 falling to pieces, Crystal Tools, oh dear, lots of problems for Square Enix. But you do look at this game and it's like, there is, other than like, there's an excellent combat system by the combat system man, and they are trying to execute things to a high quality, even though I'm having a very enjoyable experience. It's like, I don't think I can say that it's more than the sum of its parts. And I also don't think I can say that I think it's very good, even though I'm enjoying it to like an 8 out of 10 level or a 9 out of 10 level, because there are so many visible, clear flaws. And it's the sort of thing where there's things that I would certainly overlook in FF14 because that's in the structure of an MMO, and I'll kind of like, I'll give them some things. But in the structure of a full built-for-purpose game, I do think there are things, even just their approach to like the camera and cutscenes, the way that they like disrupt player control so often, and just a lot of things like that do feel profoundly stuck in the past in a bad way.
Yeah, there's elements of that like, honestly, it never bugs me because I know what I'm going in for, because I'm used to playing an FF game and that being like the constant thing of, honestly, you're not even playing a game half the time here. And that's been the case.
True.
That's been the case for many, many years, and I've always liked that. Outside of like 13 was notorious because you didn't get to play the game for 40 hours, and that is not the case here.
Oh, totally.
But
yeah, the insanity of FF13 is not repeated in that way whatsoever. Like, you will immediately jump into this and have a fun time because the combat system is bloody brilliant.
Yeah, Ryoto Suzuki called it his magnum opus, and that's coming from the guy who made Dragon's Dogma and Devil May Cry 5 Combat. And you go, I can see why you think that. And you are largely completely correct, because I know Platinum Games worked on a segment of it, and I'm not sure it's been revealed which yet, although I'm pretty sure I've seen it because it's the most Platinum Games section of a video game I've ever played, including their games. But they would not hope to make combat like this. No one would. It's honestly profound that they actually managed, to be quite frank. All of those issues do boil down to, it seems to have been made more than slightly out of fear in a couple ways. And this is like from the aspect of, I love this game to pieces. I've played it for 45 hours in the past 5 days. Honestly, I've been playing it that much, I'm not even sure what a day is anymore. All I know is I wake up, I do some work, and then I play FF, and then at some point I fall asleep without going to bed. That kind of how much I'm playing it. And it's really gripping in so many ways. I love it to pieces. But it's FF14 with the good combat system attached, and a lot more of I guess it's FF14 unshackled from FF14 being an MMO,
but then shackled.
But then it's shackled because that's what the two lead writers worked on recently for the past however many years. They were in FF14, so they know how to present writing from side quest dialogue, from cutscenes. They're not very good at it's not awful, but even like you're going through a stage, because this is where the combat DNA comes into it, where they've kind of made a Devil May Cry and stuck it to a Final Fantasy.
It does feel like that.
It is, because if you unlock the arcade mode and you see the structure of the stages of the boss fights is all made to match a replayable arcade mode with a little cutscene off toggle, so you can skip the cutscene seamlessly when you're doing the arcade mode. You can see that they have a little bit of these are incredible elements and they work kind of well together, but they don't come together to be exceptional in any real capacity, which is honestly frustrating. But also, this is the most made for me game of all time, because I love FF14 and I love DMC's combat system, so it just goes, what if the game was both of those? And that's why I'm like, I find all of the flaws don't impact me whatsoever. And then if I like step outside myself and look at them from an outside angle, I go, what do you mean these are side quests? What do you mean this game is just an open world fast travel simulator? What the hell is going on? But then you read the dialogue, you get the quests, you see how the world's built, you go to Vivian, and to like gives you the state of the realm and goes, here's the history of Valisthea presented beautifully in this format, and you go, this is the most Yasumi Matsuno game ever created. And that is saying something. And that's probably why it's not going to sell quite as well as anyone hoped, despite all the bombast, despite everything. It is what it wanted to be, because I think most of the like core team joined Square Enix, literally, or Square Enix, whatever time they joined, because they like played Tactics Ogre or FFT or 12, went, I'm going to work with Yasumi Matsuno. And they didn't work with him, but they worked with everyone else who wanted to work with him, and then made his magnum opus without him being involved. And it's like, yeah, but those were kind of spin-offs of FF for a reason.
I think the easiest way to wrap it into something is to sort of say, it feels like they should have just not bothered to do the things that they weren't interested in. They probably should have not bothered to make it open world. They probably should have taken a little bit more from God of War. They probably should have not bothered with like the RPG elements if they weren't going to do them big. They could have just made it character action game progression rather than that, which they kind of did.
See, that's the thing, right? The character action game progression is there because that's like, if you play a DMC, all you get is you get your extra health, you get your extra devil trigger, you get your red orbs to unlock abilities, and that stuff is in the game. Then you've got leveling up because you have to level up in a Final Fantasy game, which honestly, in terms of how that's like implemented balance-wise, it feels fine. It feels like a UI abstraction for generally increasing your power, and it gives you a nice challenge whenever you're fighting the like S rank hunting monsters. You're like, that's 15 levels higher than me. I can take it. Why? Because this is a character action game, and I am good at playing this game, so I get to succeed as a result. There's a lot of like the side quests tie into item creation where you go, okay, well, there is a functioning like RPG economy. There is functioning upgrades. There's functioning like customization in your accessories based on like which ability you want to like augment or reduce cooldown. All of that's there. It's just, you can tell that they made a lot more of it and then cut a lot of it out when they realized it was going to impact with a character action thing. And like that's where this game is ultimately a continuation on the Final Fantasy step towards action RPG. And I haven't played the 7 remake yet, so I don't know how that's combat ultimately fares with its RPG like mechanics and customization and like the material and stuff like that. But this is a case of they went, we need character action. We, Square Enix, are terrible at that. Let's go get the best in the business at it. So they did. They even got Platinum to help on stuff as well.
And as time went on, like we've been able to identify this, like whether it's going from very much like rigid turn-based game to more active time battle. Like my first Final Fantasy was Crisis Core in the PSP. That was action combat. Right? Like they've clearly been going in this direction and have wanted to for a long time. Again, like Final Fantasy 13-3, Lightning Returns.
It was like the first mainline fantasy game, mainline FF game that was technically sequel, so it's not really mainline as far as most were concerned, but it was the first one that was like, when you press your buttons actually matters all the time, which was like the first action game truly. And then 15 was an action game that wasn't really an action game because you just had kind of held buttons and stuff happened, but it looked good, it felt good. It's what they'd always visualized for FF. If you watch Advent Children, you see what they wanted Final Fantasy VII to be. They wanted it to be this huge bombastic and crazy action, and now they put that in the game, but they put it in at the cost of a lot of things, which is like, and this is all coming from the perspective of, I love this game to pieces.
Yeah, I really like it too.
And
we're having fun.
If I were to score it, my first thought is 10, and then I go, it's not good enough to really get a 10, even though I feel it should, which is where I'm like, the 90 is basically perfect, because everything it does exceptionally well. It's just what it doesn't do tells a very interesting story.
Yeah, it's like my objective rating has got to be like my objective, of all the things that it tries to do,
objectivity
of all
real.
of the bits that are contained within this piece of software. Like, I feel like I have to give it a 7 because it's like, you've excelled at some of those things, like, say it's your degree, but it's like, you failed that exam and you didn't hand in that piece of coursework. So it's like, it's a 7 on balance, but for me personally, it's like an 8.5.
Yeah, I would certainly say the game does open up and improve it quite a bit past VR, where a lot more of it is like, because I don't even think you've unlocked the hunt boards or had any of those combat sequences. There's a couple of sequences that are like, because obviously this game is about bombasticness. It's about what is the biggest FF can possibly be. You have an experience like how the story develops in interesting ways, and not even just interesting ways, but like,
I know that I'm not even close to the insane scale that this game. I don't know if it was Gene Park who said, it's like, think of all media that has big things in it that from the 2000s and onward. This is bigger. And while I haven't got there yet, from the bits that I have, again, I'm not going to try. I don't want to say where I've got because I could say it and Matt would know, but then it might spoil you.
I've
There's
figured it out.
already been stuff that's stupid big.
Yeah, you literally have seen absolutely nothing yet. When I say this makes the likes of Bayonetta and Metal Gear Rising look like child's play at times, I'm not joking. Which again is really cool, and it's perfect for the combat system. It's perfect for soak and score because the soundtrack this game is
Crazy good so far.
It is. The only thing it's maybe missing is something like the FF14 players. It's missing its proper like Beneath Dark Waters. It's missing its proper like like Footfalls. It's missing the proper real iconic things.
So no flow to make everyone cry.
Yeah, but in every single time the music shows up, you're like, oh my god, soaking it on again.
Even just like the core boss fight music is great. It's such good combat music.
The hunt one is called No Risk No Reward, and every time it plays, I like sit up straight. I'm just like, yes, let's go.
I'm still going to be like weird and be like, I do kind of prefer the complete lunacy of Shadowbringers.
Yeah, of course.
But yeah, this is fantastic. So I think if I was to wrap things up in terms of where I am right now, to somebody like me, for whom turn-based with a bunch of random battles is the most boring thing in the universe, I could play Final Fantasy 13. I would need it to be like a 300% ROM hack speed mode, right? Like,
well, that's why all the remakes of those games have those included.
True. Yeah, which probably means there's a lot of this franchise's history I can now engage with without being bored to tears, even though I did play Lord of the Rings: The Third Age, the best Final Fantasy game ever, of course, 100%, whenever I was young. But yeah, like, based on my experience, I would highly recommend playing this, and just because I give it a very high recommendation, it also doesn't mean that I don't agree with everything Skill Up said about it.
Yeah, this is one of those things that's like, there are the subjective areas, like the most interesting one usually, but I think here the objective side is almost more interesting because it's a game that so clearly divides what it is and is less interested in doing, in spite of then having the baggage of a very large, history series. That's exactly why I think this is so well talked about, is because any other game releasing like this kind of doesn't matter, but this is FF. This is one of the series in video gaming, and how it moves into the modern era. And this is a step that I personally love to pieces, because like I said, there has not been a video game that is more catered to my tastes in history than this, because I love everything about it in every single way, except for some of the fact that it's not quite as overly engaging and interesting and playing with expectations like in Nier Automata. It doesn't dethrone that, even though that game has substantially worse combat and substantially worse basically everything. It's just a more personally striking game. But this is a fantastic game for me, but it's a matter of taste. Yeah. If you like what FF12 and FFT does, and like how those stories progress, how they feel, like the themes they add there, if you like a lot of dialogue and a lot of talking, a lot of side quests, it's there. But if you want something a little bit more goopy gamer brain enabled, it's intentionally not that. It's the same reason people will skip a lot of side quests in FF14, because there's no heavy reward for them. And the point is, this game has issued rewards where possible, unless they need it for either a combat balance situation or to match the feel of, say, there's a quest where you go and gather materials to forge a legendary weapon, and that's there. But the legendary weapon doesn't matter very much, because weapon stats are kind of there, and they always make sure you can get something that's effective enough. So it's not a massive upgrade that changes your game. It's just kind of, here's some numbers. Yeah. But that's the thing, where the point of that quest isn't to get the weapon. The point of that quest is to see what it takes for your blacksmith friend, or for your blacksmith's friend, for the village he grew up in, for the person that was your friend who had you help the blacksmith because he was worried about how his mate was getting on. All of those real human things, all those real interesting parts, are the actual reason for playing it, in the way that anyone who's playing FF14 will understand. It's because it's all that stuff that kind of matters, but that doesn't flex with being a video game all the time, which is where it's most interesting.
If the next Final Fantasy game was in this direction, bettering things, making it a more even experience, I would be unbelievably excited for that. So I think that they are in a direction that could be an absolutely fantastic win. But I have a feeling that while that may be true for me, it's like, could they do that and then make the skill ups of the world of people who really like Final Fantasy for other reasons? Can they make those people happy within this format of game? or are they just moving on? Because equally, if they made a Final Fantasy that, you know, was like turn-based combat or ATB combat, you know, whole party and everything, there's every chance that, you know, I would be less interested than I am in this.
That's the problem we faced, right?
It's a hard job.
Isn't it? That's they have to make the game that's for everyone, but also for FF fans. And that's honestly, it's how the cookie crumbles. They do have plans, obviously, here. Like, there's Twisted Boxer reports, there's an 18-month post-launch plan, which includes like a PC port marketing kind of stuff like that. Maybe more updates. No promises of DLC, I imagine, because that's what happened 15.
Yeah, they pretty much did say, like, this is, you know, intended to be a one-and-done experience.
Yeah.
Well, see how it goes. Overall, though, I'm happy that they've done some really good things. I'm definitely going to play Devil May Cry 5 relatively soon after this, because I'm being opened up to a new type of combat system that is super fun. So there is a lot of great stuff. I think the majority of people will probably have an excellent time with this game. It's just one that happens to be a little bit more interesting than some of us expected. That's it for us, and we'll see you next time.